That's my son. His name is Taraku. My husband Scott and I adopted him from Ethiopia in 2009. And I can tell you that adoption is not for the faint of heart. And Ethiopian and transracial adoption in particular is not for people who want to be invisible. Now, Scott and I had a little bit of a jump on this because we're a couple of tattooed oddballs, so we were used to being stared at, but that is a very different kind of attention than, for instance, we're living in New York, and Taraku is 2.5 years old, and he's been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So he's having these violent tantrums, like 10 times a day. And we have to go to a therapist to learn how to contain him safely so that he doesn't hurt himself or anyone else. And how you do this is lie down behind him on the ground and hold his head with one hand and wrap your other arm around his arms and secure his legs with your legs. And you stay there until he calms down. And this looks terrible. And it feels terrible. And when you're the only white people in a subway station in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and you have to restrain a screaming African-American toddler, that is a very different kind of visibility than I had been accustomed to at that point. And because we're so visible as a family, people want to talk to me a lot about adoption. And sometimes they say things like, oh, well, I've always wanted to adopt, but my spouse would never consider it because you never know what you're going to get. And I think, wow, I mean, I never thought of that when we started the process, because I figured you never know what you're going to get anyway, right? That's just like life. So, okay, I understand adoption is not for everybody. But it does have things to teach all of us. Like, for instance, adoption really highlights the whole nature versus nurture thing. Like, I can always tell when people are studying Taraku to try to gather evidence for whatever side of this debate they fall on. You know, oh, he's so fast. Well, of course, because Ethiopians win all the marathons. And oh, he's so handsome. Well, of course, because Ethiopians are all so beautiful. And, oh, he's such a great drummer. Enough said. But if you look more closely at how adoptees assemble an integrated sense of identity, we can see that who we are and where we belong in this world are not just a function of nature or nurture. Who we are is an act of imagination. We are not just our genetic material or how we are raised, we are also the stories we tell ourselves. So let me tell you a little bit about my son now. He's 6, and he's doing great. There are no more tantrums, except once in a while when there's an iPad involved. And the only other thing you need to know about this kid is this: airplanes. Airplanes, airplanes, and airplanes. My son loves airplanes. He spends all day, every Saturday at LAX, watching the jets take off. He knows every airline. He knows where they're from. He knows where they hub out of. He knows the difference between a 747 and an A380. Do you know what those little tips on the ends of airplane wings are called? No? Oh, someone actually knew it. No, you don't. Neither did I, until he told me they're called winglets. Yes, winglets. Winglets. So if you take nothing else away from this talk, winglets. So this little boy, who is being raised 10,000 miles from where he was born, is crazy about airplanes. And he has a room plastered in maps, and he wants to hear all the time about his journey from Africa to California, and he has embraced his journey as a grand adventurer. I remember when we first brought him home. After years of bureaucracy and frustration, they finally placed my gorgeous son in my arms, and I was overcome with a sense of rightness and purpose and calm. And my big, tough guy husband, with tattoos to his eyeballs, former United States Marine, was weeping. And it was love at first sight for us. For Taraku, not so much. He was looking at the sky all the time, and so we picked for him the middle name Moon. We thought, he loves the sky, how poetic, we'll call him Taraku Moon. And then we figured out that he just didn't want to make eye contact with us. It's true, he was looking away. And we were worried. We were worried. We were worried about the eye contact. We were worried about his motor development. We were worried about his lungs. And so for the first few months that he was here, we just pretty much held him and fed him and walked him in circles around the neighborhood. And while I did this, mostly for lack of anything else to do, I told him a constant stream of stories. I told him about how we came to be a family, and I told him stories about Africa, and I told him stories about Paddington Bear and the stuff I was raised with. And slowly, his eye contact improved, and his muscles caught up, and I felt him relax into my body. And when I say slowly, really, it took years. There were years of night terrors and screaming tantrums. And it has not been easy for him. But he is doing beautifully now, and he trusts that we're not going anywhere. And he sits there with his little hand in mine and his eyes wide, and he watches the sky, not because he can't make eye contact anymore, but because he loves airplanes. And he asks me all the time, he's fascinated about his origins. He says, am I African? And I say, yes. And he says, am I Jewish? And I say, yes. And he says, am I Irish? And I say, yes. And he says, I'm going to go there. And I say, where? And he says, Korea. And while my son is not yet consciously creating an identity from all of these disparate influences, that is precisely what he's doing. Slowly, piece by piece, and with great courage, my son is inventing himself. And he is inventing himself as a traveler who's looking toward his journey forward and his journey backward at the same time. And witnessing this sometimes painful but often very inspiring process has shed a lot of light on my life because I also was adopted. I was adopted as an infant in the early 70s, and the rhetoric around adoption has changed a lot since then. And I still sometimes have differences with my mother about this because she says it is exactly the same. It is exactly the same as if I had given birth to you. And I say, no, it's not. It's not the same. And that's not to say that it's better or worse or that there's more or less love. There isn't. It's not a qualitative statement. It's a fact. Adoptive families are formed in a different way. And as a result, adoptees have a more complex answer than most people to the question, who am I? And I think about this when I tell my son bedtime stories. I think that being adopted, it's like being a character in a fairy tale. There's a sense of invention and possibility. And I know that when I was a little girl, I used to tell myself stories all the time to explain where I came from. I was a princess who had been spirited away from a magical island by a wicked fairy, or I was a gypsy who fell off the back of a caravan and got taken in by kindly farmers. You know, my mother loves that one. And in all of these fantasies, as a result of this dislocation, I had a secret power in me, and I just didn't know what it was yet. And I've come to realize that that actually was true all along, because all of these hours that I spent weaving tales about where I came from, these hours were my training ground for being a writer. And a writer is what I still am today. And whether or not we are professional storytellers, we are all telling ourselves and our children stories all the time about who we are and where we come from and what matters to us. So this isn't just relevant to adoptees, because in my son's kindergarten class alone, we have interracial families, we have same-sex parents, we have single parents, we have everything. And all of these kids are busy using their imagination to cook up who they are. So regardless of your personal family configuration, adoption can give us all the chance to reflect on family and identity in a more creative way. And the other thing I've learned from adopting my son is that it's not just our sense of self that is a conscious creation. It is also our connection to others. Love is a decision. Love is an action. And I can't really think of a more important lesson. When UNICEF places the number of orphans worldwide today at 153 million, there are 4.6 million orphans in Ethiopia. There are 500,000 kids in foster care in this country alone right now. And while adoption is not the solution for the world orphan crisis, it was a solution for my son, and it was a solution for me. And what I've learned from it is that where we belong in this world is not just a function of the blood in our veins, it's a choice. It's a gift we give each other. And with that in mind, I like to think that all those millions of children living without the love of a family right now, that we all might be able to choose a story in which their care is all of our responsibility. And I don't know how that's going to happen, but I do know that right now my son is watching the sky. And what was once for him a place of escape from pain has become a space of enormous possibility, where giant hunks of steel that weigh 200 tons somehow, magically, fly. Thank you.